How are you going, everyone? Thank you for coming on by today. And in 2016, within episode 36, there was a tribute to a classic attack we saw for the first time in episode 162 of Dragon Ball Z. And that, of course, is the final flash. And I thought it would be interesting to break down both scenes and do a comparison like I've done in the past, and give my overall conclusion at the end. And some may ask as to why I'm not comparing it to the final flash we saw in episode 122, and that's because the storyboard provided by Hiroyuki Kakadu was a clear tribute in every way, with the shot selection being almost mirror images, and I feel it makes a much more interesting comparison, whereas with 122 it had about one shot inspired by the original scene, and that was sort of it. And like usual though, with every video, the featured artist for this one is the Kings_Canvas. He is only sitting at 43 followers at time of recording and has put out some really nice illustrations. So show him some support, link is in the description, I'm sure he would appreciate it. And use this hashtag and tag me on Insta for your chance to feature in a video. But with that, let's get to it. So for the staff list of 162, you probably have one of the most well-known names out of them all, and that is Tadayoshi Yamamuro as an animation supervisor and key animator, alongside another legend, that being the series director of Dragon Ball Z, Daisuke Nishio, filling the role as storyboarder and director. However, episode 36 of Super has its fair share of talent as well, with another big name who has been with this series since 1986 and who is very well known for his detailed effects, that being Masahiro Shimanuki, who is the animation supervisor as well as providing key animation for the second half of this finale against Megetta. However, the first part presents the debut of someone who I feel doesn't get mentioned enough, and that is Futoshi Higashide, who would thankfully become a regular on the show, delivering many amazing cuts, such as in the Goku vs Kefla fight or the match between Gohan and Goku. The storyboard for this episode, like mentioned before, is done by Hiroyuki Kakadu, well known for being the series director for the first two Digimon series, and who has worked on Dragon Ball in the past within episode 5 and 10 of Dragon Ball GT. And finally, the director for this episode is Kenichi Takashita. And with that out of the way, now let's look at the scene itself. So starting off, we have some nice poses. I like the way Yamamuro sort of tucks Vegeta in before he launches out. Nice anticipation. And in the next shot, we get this twitching effect with quite an expressive shot of Vegeta. Now, Yamamuro certainly wasn't known for being right out there when it came to facial expressions, but his Vegeta here is really good. The arched eyebrows and eyes, the small breaks in between the lines of the pupils, and all the creases drawn around the nose work together in creating this dramatic expression, and it certainly works with escalating the tension. Then there is a pan away to Trunks and Krillin with some more great character art, of course, then going back to Vegeta with an explosion of aura and some nice impact frames and lighting. Then another angle is shown with some really great aura effects again with the shapes and the overall scale they get to, before aura completely envelops him, giving this really cool effects with the silhouetted shapes of Vegeta with this bright yellow light bursting outwards before covering the frame and slowly fading out. The shot then switches to behind him, where you have this erratic flickering of aura with about 4 frames looped. The framing of Vegeta here also creates a great sense of scale, and although blurred out, the background animation of the water is quite detailed and looks really good. And we then have a reused frame from before, and although there's very minimal animation here, the fluctuation of the size of his body, this outline effect fading in and out, impact frames, the pointy shapes for the aura paired with the bulky proportions, and whited out eyes really does a great job of creating an intense atmosphere, especially as the clouds after some reaction shots start to cover everyone and the sky begins to darken. Excellent build up so far. Vegeta then prepares the attack with some really well drawn hands. I like the gesture, and there is the same process we saw before, with then a close up of his hands with some smears and lines around the hands alongside a stack of impact frames, overall doing an excellent job once again in illustrating a struggle. Thereafter, lightning darts around erratically, tearing up the environment. However, the shapes aren't anything special, but Nishio's framing here of Cell really caught my eye in the overall composition of how you have lightning bolts on each side tearing up the ground and dust clouds ensue while Cell just stands there not even flinching. It really does sell his cocky attitude. And I have to say, Yamamuro draws such a good Cell in this era. But once again, back to Vegeta, getting close to the finale now. More great character art of him that certainly does justice to the original panel, with the sort of heat wave effects coming in, and then this ball of energy begins to appear, and the shapes for the lightning coming off the ball look really cool. Then after some more reused frames and reactions, we get to the final release, with a beautiful impact frame right as the blast covers the entire screen. Nishio also makes a choice to darken the sky in this deep blue and gradually changing the color palette for Cell, creating a strong contrast between the environment and this bright ball of energy, also making this tense atmosphere. Yamamuro's expressions for Cell is additionally quite on point again to the manga, and as Cell is hit, he is enveloped in this blinding white light, as well as Android 16, who is also covered in this bright fluorescent yellow light. However, all this great and dramatic effects work doesn't stop there, as this beam pretty much engulfs the entire island, and you get this glorious frame of it shooting across the planet's surface and into space with some spectacular background art, with Nishio making a small addition in the storyboard to have it launch past the camera and into space. All in all, this section may have been limited animation wise, but Nishio makes it work with an impactful storyboard, creating a strong sense of scale and depth, but also atmosphere. Furthermore, despite a lot of reused animation, Yamamuro absolutely delivers, making this a very memorable episode. I also have to say, despite this laying outside of the animation and artwork side of things, I absolutely love the atmosphere that the dragon theme gives, but most importantly, the classic piano that plays as Vegeta yells Final Flash, an all-time classic. But now to episode 32, so starting off with quite a nice shot of Vegeta, there is quite a rough feeling to the line work, which I think works well with this type of scene, and the placement of the shading carries quite a lot of depth. The gestures, however, as he powers up are subpar, being quite symmetrical, especially in comparison to the original. And while Yamamuro isn't really known for loose gestures either, there is still interest in the pose with a variety of bends and straights with the body, legs, and arms. Then back to a close-up again, which is okay but not overly expressive. Then there are some reaction shots corrected by Shimanuki, and I have to say it's refreshing to see him still using that older style of shading for characters like Krillin, Bulma, and Trunks, with the indented cheek shading and the overall shapes. Soon after, there is a really tight close-up of Vegeta with again a lot of depth conveyed through the shading. I like how his eyes feel like they're sitting in a socket. Then Higashide steps in with some really nice effects to start off, and the storyboard following a similar formula as Nishio's storyboard with the angles and framing of Vegeta. Miyako Tsuji, the chief animation supervisor, steps in as well with this correction, which is very well drawn and on model to Tadayoshi Yamamuro's character sheets. However, that is sort of its downfall and appeal at the same time, because it suffers from that same stiffness in the face. For example, the eyes don't arch but stay in one place, and the lines for the creases under the eyes follow a straight path instead of arching around the planes of the face. Again, it's well drawn, just not that appealing to me personally. However, moving back to Higashide, he draws some really gorgeous effects as Vegeta continues to power up. The shapes for the lightning look perfect, and I like Kakudo's framing here with this low angle shot from under the stadium floor. It carries a lot of depth. Vegeta then powers up with a really nice red for the aura, and quite an intense bloodshot-eyed Vegeta pops up this time with some good expression, although the following frames seem to have been uncorrected and aren't overly appealing with some odd proportions. And again, we get some more references to Nishio's storyboard, and with the first person perspective shot added, I personally love seeing this angle as you get to see exactly what the character does. Of course, it's nothing groundbreaking, but it always adds a bit of interest. But moving forward, Higashide continues on with more cool effects work as the lightning starts wrapping around the planet, with Kakudo delivering a strong sense of scale with the storyboard, providing a variety of perspectives. The whole background then shifts quite darker in value, creating a tense atmosphere and contrast. Then another effects specialist, Masahiro Shimanuki himself, steps in with some interesting effects also, and animating debris floating around the characters. And I only just noticed how many layers of shading he adds to Vegeta. It's not common in Dragon Ball to see 5 flat tones of shading, but it certainly gives depth and provides this realistic look to the metal. His character art for Vegeta is also really nice, defining muscles much more and taking quite a nostalgic approach to the Super Saiyan hair. For the longest time, going back to the early days of the Android arc, the Super Saiyan hair started to be divided much more into individual spikes with lines added, and this eventually became the standard look, with Shimanuki himself adopting this approach in later arcs. However, here he goes back to a much simpler look, to something you'd perhaps see in the Namek arc or like in his work in movie 6, drawing just the outline of the hair and using shapes to define the volume to the hair. Of course, it's nothing way out there, but it's an interesting approach to see, especially in this era. Vegeta then fires off the attack with his pulsating beam effect, and Vegeta launches back with some really beautiful and detailed effects work. Quite a lot of complex shapes here with even more debris drawn, just like you would expect from Shimanuki, before the camera is completely covered in this blinding light, very much in the same fashion as we saw in episode 162. The beam then shoots out, breaking the barrier. However, Shimanuki continues on ramping things up further and further with more intense effects animation as Vegeta tries to push back this attack, before getting somewhat stunned with a mighty punch to end it off. Now to the conclusion. So both episodes were very well directed with interesting choices of color. The storyboards also provided a great sense of scale. However, I would say Kakudo's was probably the most dynamic of the two. In terms of animation, when it came to effects, both were impactful, with Higashide making a memorable first debut. However, when it came to Vegeta, you didn't get as strong of a struggle communicator like, for example, in the original scene, you had this erratic motion in how the hands were animated, whereas with Super, it was somewhat more limited in this area, with the bulk of the animation being more so with the effects. However, I feel like this is far more to do with Super's incredibly tight schedule rather than a lack of skill or effort from the talented staff who worked on this one. And the same thing applies to the character art in this portion. A lot of it here in 36 was a mixed bag, whereas with 162, Yamamuro delivered quite a consistent and a high quality standard throughout his cut. However, again, this lack of polish is not something that should be entirely shifted on the staff's skill level. My only qualms with the art style is more so to do with Tadayoshi Yamamuro's character designs for Super. But overall, episode 162 was very memorable, and with episode 36, while it certainly didn't impact me as much when I first watched it, it was certainly well done, and looking back now and knowing how tight their schedule was compared to Z, the staff did an amazing job despite the odds stacked against them. So with that though, I'll end the video. I would also like to give credit to DB animators for the identification of which key animators worked on what portions. It was a massive help, but with that, I'll see you later.